I used to believe that there's an ideal path of success, an ideal way to get from where I am now to where I want to go, to whatever my goal is. So the model in my mind was that I'm here, I have a goal that's out there somewhere, and the ideal way to get there would be a straight line. And my job is to find out what is the best, most efficient way to get to that goal. What are the things I need to learn? What are the skills I need to develop? What are the steps I need to take to get there? And it comes with an idea of success and failure, which is, am I doing all the right things as efficiently, as effectively as possible? Am I always heading in the right direction? And any deviation from that is, well, it's less ideal and it's almost a form of failure. And I've come to realize that this whole model is really, really flawed. And not only is it flawed, but actually it adds a lot of pressure. So because of this idea, I put so much pressure on myself. It creates a frame in which it is very easy to interpret all kinds of things that happen as mistakes, as failures, which ironically can lead to a slower progress of growth, a slower advancement towards success, because you're getting discouraged all the time, because it feels bad to feel like, oh, look, here, I made another mistake, I failed again, and so on. And also because you might interpret things as mistakes and setbacks and then course correct, even though you're on the right path the whole time. It feels to me like I had a faulty map in my head about what this looks like. And of course, if you're trying to navigate by a faulty map, it's not very helpful in getting to where you want to go. So let me explain how my mind has changed over time so that hopefully, if you have a similar view of this, you can update your map as well and get better at achieving your goals. I'm going to be using personal examples and stories from my own experience to make this as clear and practical as possible. And I want to start with one really crucial update of this mental map, if you will. Let's take the topic of productivity. For many years in my life, I was obsessed with and pursuing the knowledge and skill of what I would call systematic productivity. And systematic productivity is the idea that you make logical, rational decisions about what is my goal, where do I want to go, how do I break that down into subtasks and smaller steps, and then how do I make sure that I use whatever my task management system, my time management system, my calendar, my priorities, and so on to make sure that I'm spending focused, undistracted time on the most important tasks that will get me to my goal as quickly as possible. This whole idea of productivity is representative of the straight line model, right? You go, I'm here, this is my goal. I try to break down the steps between where I am and that goal, and then just execute and make sure that I'm spending my time moving towards that goal and not wasting my time. And this idea of productivity served me extremely well. It is what I used to go from feeling totally disorganized and chaotic and working on too many things at once and never getting paid to building not just one, but multiple successful businesses from scratch. Nowadays, I don't do as much of this systematic productivity thing anymore. What my focus has shifted to is something you can maybe call like the Tao type productivity. I try to be in tune with the flow of life. I try to listen to what is asked of me, what is the next best thing to do, and it's much less something that I plan weeks or months in advance. In practice, what this looks like is that, for example, when it comes to doing creative work, like recording this content piece I'm doing right now, my previous approach would have been to figure out what is the theme that I'm going to make the next, let's say, 20 videos on, and how does it tie in with my funnel, with my mailing list, with a product launch or something like that, and then plan it all out and have a clear idea that's systematic and that has the end goal in mind. The end goal might be, I'm going to sell this product, or I want to grow my following or grow my mailing list, and everything is driving towards that goal. And I would have a list of the videos I'm going to make well in advance of ever making them. Now, this looks very different. For example, the idea for this video that I'm recording right now is one I had about 20 minutes ago while I was on a walk. I didn't know yesterday that this is what I'd be recording today, let alone a week ago. And it's worth noting that I'm still being productive in terms of output. This here is the 29th video I've recorded in the last 29 days. So high output is still possible, but the whole approach is very different, because what I'm basically doing is I'm waiting for inspiration to strike. I'm waiting for an idea to come to me. I'm waiting for a certain kind of feeling, because I'll have ideas bouncing around in my head all the time, but I'm waiting for that thing that feels like this is it. And then I try to start recording as soon as possible. So that would be the difference between systematic productivity, the thing I was doing before, and then the Tao style productivity, which is the thing I'm doing now. And here is a really important insight I had about this whole progress of self-improvement and goal achievement and so on. What I felt like before is that if I change from one productivity system to another, if I discover a better way to do things, then ideally I would have used that new way to do things all along. And in a way, it was a mistake that I didn't discover this system, this method sooner. So if we're talking about productivity, the implication is that there is a perfect, optimal productivity system. And any time I spend not implementing that system is a form of failure. It's a waste of time. It is suboptimal at the very least. So if I have a productivity system I'm using now, and then I discover a better productivity system next year, it would have been better to use that productivity system earlier. Or if we bring it back to this, like if the Tao style productivity that I'm following now is in fact a better way to create content, let's say, then the logical conclusion would be, well, ideally I would have done it like this all along. I would have done it like this years ago when I started. And you could also turn that on its head and you could say, well, some of the most successful content I made happened when I was using the systematic productivity approach. This is certainly true in terms of reaching conversion goals. I used to be really good at making content that sells my product. And also for a while I was tinkering with viral content, and I was really good at making content that gets millions of views. Whereas lately I've been tinkering with content, but there isn't even anything I'm selling that this is leading to. So of course it's not making me any money. And also none of this stuff is going viral because it's not viral baity content. So from that view, you could say, well, this has all been a step back, and maybe eventually I'll find my way back to the more optimal systematic productivity approach. And the time I spent in between doing something else was a waste of time. So again, this is all the beliefs that come from this linear view that says there's one optimal way to do things, there's one fastest progress towards the goal, and the more in line I am with that, the better, and everything else is inefficiency. This just does not feel true to me anymore. And it feels much more like different things, different activities, different systems, different mental models are appropriate for different stages of life or for different chapters in a life story. And I'm going to link to my video where I talk about the business I tried to build during COVID and how that failed, which I recommend you watch if you want to have a clearer sense of what I'm talking about here. But the short answer is that my experience was that I was using all of the lessons that I had learned in the decade or so before on how to be productive, how to achieve goals, how to build a business. I was using and implementing what I had learned, and it was not working. In fact, it was quite astonishing the degree to which it was not working, the degree to which obstacles were put in my path, the degree to which stuff kept going wrong, mostly in ways that were outside of my control. Like things like, well, COVID happening, first of all, that was outside of my control. But then also things like all the visa issues and things that my team members that I tried to fly in to work with me were encountering. And even issues like illness and injury happening in the worst possible times to just throw further obstacles in front of me. The whole approach of I have a logically, rationally decided goal and I'm moving towards that as efficiently as possible was just not working. And what it feels like is that the world was giving me a very clear signal saying, okay, this chapter has closed. This approach served you for the last 10 odd years, and now it's time for something different. And that's a big part of what led me to this new, more intuitive approach. I'm trying to pay attention to what is the world around me showing me? What signs am I getting? What are the signals that are telling me that I'm on the right path or not? And it's not something that can just be captured in a spreadsheet. This is also a progression from mind to more integrated mind and body. because the purely systematic approach to productivity and goal setting can be done by a brain in a vat, essentially, right? I can do that, and the whole thing is actually mind only. It is all made up in my mind. It's all made up based on rational, logical reasons. And it essentially ignores any non-mind input. Because, for example, you essentially treat your body as a machine in this case, which is what I did for many, many years. It's like I set the goal in my mind and I say, okay, how do I get there as efficiently as possible? Well, one of the things is I put as much hard work into this as possible. And even if this is really bad for my body because I'm sitting down all day and I'm stressed out and I'm reaching burnout and so on, it's like, well, that's fine. The body is just being pushed through. The mind says, this is where we're going, ignores any signs from the body that maybe this is too much, and you just keep pushing until you get there. And that is also something that I have more and more left behind, and I've become more and more sensitive to, well, what signals am I getting outside of just the logical mind? The important idea I want to get across here is that my obsession with a systematic approach to productivity in the past was not wrong. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a waste of time. It was appropriate to where I was at and what I wanted to learn and experience at the time. And that then came to an end. It feels like I explored and experienced enough of that way of being and that way of seeing the world and that way of moving through the world. And then it was time for a change in chapters. This might be a good time to talk about the fact that I have a tattoo. I don't know why this is so funny. This might be a good time to talk about the fact that I have a giant snake tattooed onto my arm and my chest. This snake is symbolic of many, many things. One of them is the idea of shedding one's skin. The snake sheds its skin, leaves its old outer shell behind in order to renew itself. And this is something that in my life I've experienced many times, and I think I've gotten fairly good at. I've experienced this kind of thing where it's like a chapter comes to an end and it's such a significant change that it really feels like shedding a skin, and it's kind of an unpleasant process. It really feels like I'm shedding an old skin. I'm leaving parts of myself behind in order to emerge into the next thing. And this is not a mistake. It's not like, well, I should have never had that old skin to begin with. No, that skin served its purpose until it was time to leave. My first really dramatic example of this was when I left the identity of the martial arts guy behind. So before that period of obsession with systematic productivity and entrepreneurship, my obsession was martial arts. And I had dedicated my whole life to this. I'd become a martial arts instructor. I was training in loads of different styles. I was basically using all of my free time to train martial arts. And this is something that served me extremely well. And it's a story that came to an end. And it came to an end very clearly. Like in my case, I actually got kicked out of the martial arts school that I'd been a part of for over 10 years. There were some ideological differences there. I'm not going to get into any details on that. But anyway, like that's how drastic the change was. It's like they literally kicked me out. They basically banished me from this organization. And this thing that had been so central to my life for so many years before, it was just time to leave it behind. And, you know, funnily enough, initially, I tried finding the next martial arts thing. And I went to several different schools and dojos and tried different combat sports and things. And nothing clicked, nothing fit. There was always some reason why I couldn't keep doing it, or it just didn't feel like a good fit. It was just, again, that the world was very clearly giving me this sign. It's time to leave this behind. It's time for the next thing. And that is when I got into this whole productivity thing and entrepreneurship. And obviously this led to beautiful experiences and financial freedom and all kinds of good stuff. So it's all good. But again, you could argue that, well, wouldn't it have been even better if I had discovered all this entrepreneurship stuff even sooner? And the answer is no, it wouldn't have. Just because the chapter changed and just because this new thing was incredibly good for me doesn't mean that the thing before was the wrong thing or a waste of time. Which reminds me of one of my favorite tweets ever by Louise Miller. She says, "I'm almost 50, and here's the best thing I've learned so far. Every strange thing you've ever been into, every failed hobby or forgotten instrument, everything you have ever learned will come back to you, will serve you when you need it. No love, however brief, is wasted." This quote is representative of how I see life nowadays. It's not a linear path from where I am now to where I want to get to. It's more of a meandering journey. In my case, that journey led through some traumatic experiences in school, from which I picked up experiences and resources, and it made me really independent. And then it led through this whole arc of my journey through martial arts and becoming a martial arts instructor, which taught me lots of resources and rebuilt the confidence I had lost in the part before. And then when I picked up all of the stuff I needed from that, it was time to go into the next thing. And I went into entrepreneurship, which has taught me too many things to list and has enriched my life in ways that are hard to describe. And that is in part because there was always this element of personal growth, of personal development. For me, entrepreneurship was always essentially a vehicle for personal development. And then that arc somehow changed and closed. And I wouldn't even say that I'm not an entrepreneur anymore. I still have a very strong entrepreneurial drive, but like the nature of how am I going to do this thing, maybe not so much what am I going to do, but how am I going to do it, clearly came to a close. And I've been in this long transitional phase that I'm still in of shedding that old skin and trying to figure out what is the next thing. And I'm trying to do that by paying attention, right? Not by predetermining what needs to happen in my mind, but by paying attention to what am I experiencing and what is the world showing me. Looking back, it is hard for me to imagine a better path. Of course, I can pick out various moments where I'm like, okay, here I made a mistake that cost me a lot of time or money, or here's, if only I had bought Bitcoin when it was 12 cents or whatever. Obviously, everybody can find potential moments in time in the past where you could have made a move that would have probably turned out really good. But apart from this kind of thing, which is usually kind of an indulgent fantasy, let's be honest, it's hard for me to imagine a better path, which begs the question, a better path for what? Because of course, if my goal is just to say, make as much money as possible, then yeah, there's lots of things I could have done better and differently. And there's also plenty of things I could be doing right now to make more money right now. But is there a better path for me to become who I am and who I want to be? That is harder to figure out. So let's come back to the idea of the map and how to update that map. So if the original idea is I'm here and I want to get somewhere to some point on the horizon, there's a naive idea that says the fastest way to get there is a straight line. And of course, as soon as you look at the actual territory, you'll find that the fastest way to get from point A to point B is very rarely a straight line. Why is that? Well, because there's landscape in between. There's valleys and hills and mountains and rivers and lakes and forests and so on. And so that's why when you put a destination into Google Maps and ask for directions, you never see a straight line. The fastest way to get there is to follow sometimes winding paths and roads. Acknowledging that there are winding paths, that it's not a straight line, is already an update of the model. But what I'm proposing is something even different, which is to say that the scenic route might be the best one to take, where you're not even choosing the fastest road from A to B. You're choosing the road that goes through a really lovely forest and where you can stop on a nice hill to take in the view and where you can rest next to a beautiful lake. And the whole thing might take way longer than if you take the shortest highway route, but it is the better path. But that begs a question. If this is what's happening, then am I implying that basically whatever you do is the right thing, whatever path you're on is the right thing? Like, if we want to optimize, what do we optimize for? And my answer to that is that I believe it's about motion. It's about momentum. I believe that you can essentially get stuck on the path. You can get stuck somewhere where life has more to offer. You could keep growing, you could keep going, but for whatever reasons, you're holding on somewhere, you're stuck somewhere. And this can happen when you get stuck in a behavior pattern. So imagine that I had refused to pay attention to the signals I was getting way back when, and I just said, okay, no, I've already dedicated more than a decade of my life to martial arts. I have to keep going on this path. And I just keep looking for a new school or a new dojo to join. And I try to make a martial arts career happen no matter what. It is possible that I would have spent years and years like trying to make that work and constantly encountering obstacles, and it just doesn't feel right. And I could have spent possibly decades, stuck there because I'm unwilling to let go of that chapter of my life. And in fact, I see this over and over again. It seems like you always come to these places where something starts repeating, some pattern starts repeating. And the question is, are you going to stay in that loop? Are you going to stay in that loop over and over and over again? Or are you going to find a way to break through? So I believe that there is a path for us to follow. And it's not necessarily that the path is laid out for us. I think we have a lot of agency in there in determining where we want to go and how we want to do things. But the question is mainly, am I stuck in loops? Am I essentially failing the same test over and over again? Or am I making progress? Am I leaving the old thing behind and moving towards a new thing in a way that feels aligned, in a way that feels good? I do strongly believe that we have somatic signals, bodily signals that tell us whether we're heading the right way or not. So that's how I'm looking at it now. I'm less concerned with where exactly am I going and how efficient am I. I'm more concerned with what are the loops in my life and am I making progress? Am I willing and able to keep moving, to keep evolving and developing, or am I holding on basically out of fear? And I try to find the pieces of my life where I'm holding on out of fear and then find ways to let go. If you're interested in how to do this, I have a whole bunch of resources for you that I'll put into the description here. First of all, I have 2 videos about loops and spirals. So this whole idea of recognizing the loops in your life and finding ways to break through, and also recognizing when you're actually in a growth spiral. So you might be re-encountering the same issue, but you're re-encountering it on new levels, in new ways, which is also a sign of growth. So I've got 2 videos that explain both of these things in detail. I'll also link to my video where I explain how growth happens. It seems, from my experience, that growth always happens in the same way. And so you can look at that process, and I made a little map that explains the process of growth. This is essentially how you break through. And you can basically look at, well, is this happening for me? Am I stuck in a loop somewhere, or am I in that process of breaking out of the loop? And then one of the great ways to recognize loops and work through them is through writing. So I'll link to my video about introspective writing. I'll also link to my introspective writing course. And I will link to my video about integrity, because integrity is part of the puzzle. Integrity and essentially being totally honest with yourself, developing the skill of being totally honest, is one way to break out of these loops. So all of these links will be down in the description. That is my updated growth/success map that I hope you find interesting and I hope serves you well. If you enjoyed this content, share it with someone who might benefit from it. Leave a comment below. Let me know if there are any questions or anything else you want to know on this topic. That is all for now. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.